For this golden green marbled cake effect, I'm using the Magnolia Kitchen chocolate cake recipe. It's one of the best recipes I've found for a chocolate cake, so if you're struggling for a chocolate cake recipe, I really recommend this book. So you go in with your dry ingredients and then you add your wet and you mix them together, giving you a really silky smooth batter. And then the secret ingredient is buttermilk, which adds a lot of lightness and moisture to your cake. So I'm creating a dowel with my Swiss meringue buttercream around my cake. I've baked a 7-inch cake in 5 layers. And then this is allowing me to put my kind of salted caramel cream or filling, in the center of my cake. Now the point of this tutorial is I'm really going to help focus on how to ice the outside of a super tall cake and how to get that buttercream on and then do the marbled effect. If you want a tutorial that shows you how to do the filling a little bit more in depth, then leave a comment below and I will get around to filming something like that for you guys. So I'm using an offset spatula here, and then I'm just adding my next layer, and I'm going to keep building these layers up, alternating between vanilla buttercream with salted caramel and then just a vanilla buttercream layer and vice versa. So I go in and I plonk lots of buttercream on top of my cake, and then I'm just going to smooth that out. This is just my very first quick layer, so it doesn't matter if it's a little bit untidy. But what I do is I fill up a piping bag with lots of buttercream and I start to push this around the cake. So what you're doing here is you're pushing out that buttercream nice and thick and then turning the turntable at the same time, keeping your piping bag where it is. And don't matter, it doesn't have to be super neat like this. You can just use your piping bag to push that buttercream back onto the cake. But the reason I do this is it gets a thick layer of buttercream on, and it means I don't have to do the whole crumb coat stage on the cake. Then I'm just pushing all that buttercream out straight onto the cake, and then don't worry, you're going to have a few gaps at the bottom. It doesn't matter because that buttercream is so thick that we'll start to move that around the entire cake. So with my spatula, I'm going in at an angle, so I'm not putting the spatula flat against the cake. I'm using just the very side of my spatula. So I'll show you here. You see it's just kind of sitting up on the side horizontal, and we're just moving the turntable and smoothing that buttercream down. So very gentle pressure. You don't want to take the buttercream off that you've added. You just want to smooth it down and then start to fill in those gaps where there's cake that's still showing. You see I am just using the edge of my spatula and then just bringing that buttercream all the way around. Taking buttercream onto the very tip of my spatula, I'm now going to fill in those gaps that you can see at the bottom and the top of the cake. So you just smooth that in, just using the tip of the spatula, not the entire length of it. So you can kind of scoop that up and then just place it nicely onto the cake, and then very gentle pressure, just swiping that back and forth. Make sure your buttercream is very soft and at warm room temperature. It will make this a lot easier. You see, I'm just keeping my spatula where it is and turning that turntable around, letting the turntable do the work. So again, let's just fill in this little gap here, so just smoothing it out using the very tip of my spatula. That's all you need, and it gives you a lot more control. And then we're just filling in those gaps. Now go ahead and pop this in the freezer if you find that it's a little harder to work with and lots of buttercream's coming off. And then you can kind of go back in and just fill it once the cake is chilled a little bit more. If your cake's wobbling around a bit, the same thing. It's a very soft cake, so pop that in the freezer for a bit, get it nice and chilled. I'm just going to fill in those gaps here. Now it doesn't have to be uber tidy because we are going to go in with a whole kind of marble design in green, so you won't be able to see any of the cake that is showing through at the moment. Now taking my bench scraper, this is so important. Now you can see it's in line with the baseboard that the cake is sitting on, and you can see there is a gap. It's not absolutely flush to the cake, and that's fine. It just means that my cake is not straight, and that is what we're working on. So you want to make sure that the bench scraper is hitting the bottom of that turntable, that the bottom is flat, and that it is touching the board that the cake sits on, or the card that the cake is sitting on. I'm taking off those crumbs that have been picked up on the bottom of the scraper, and then because this buttercream is clean and free from crumbs, I'll just put that back in the bowl. And again, I'm just going to take the very edge of my scraper and then let the turntable do the work. I'm turning the table round but keeping the bench scraper where it is. You can see there's a few gaps. That's not to worry because we're going to go in and clean that. Now you'll see what happens. I can see now, looking at it, that I've added way too much buttercream towards this side of the cake, and it's starting to take it off. Now where it's taken it off, you can see I've got all these gaps. Not to worry again, because with speed and the angle at which I'm taking my bench scraper around, it will start to smooth that area out. So now I'm going to put this in the freezer, and I'll go and just tidy up the top for you guys. So we're just going to take that bench scraper and take the edge down. I will show you this again up close when it comes to adding the green buttercream and how to get a really smooth top as well. But again, this is just my kind of rough coat at the moment, getting as much buttercream on as possible, and then we can go in and tidy this up. So I've dyed my buttercream 2 different shades of green, and I haven't mixed it well because I want that marble effect. I want to have streaks of cream in there in different tones of green. And I'm going to go on with my spatula or a spoon and just plonk that on in different areas on the cake. This cake is chilled, it's very cold. I've left it in the freezer for about 10 minutes. So everything's set. That buttercream underneath should not be moving now. It should all be about this second layer that we have going on here. So I'm just smushing that all around in just random spots on the cake so that we get this really cool marble effect. Again, this is a very quick way of doing the marble effect. There's other ways that you can do it where you layer everything up, which I've done on like kind of galaxy styled cakes. But for this, we're just going to kind of go with a very artsy feel. So I'm just scraping that all the way around, and you see in my spatula I'm pushing in different directions now. I'm doing it up the cake, sideways on the cake, because I don't want it all to blend into one. I want to have those little gaps and be able to see some of that buttercream underneath. So I'm kind of just being a little bit more artistic with this and scraping it round. Okay, so taking my bench scraper, I'm just going to do a quick clean up of the sides of this cake. Making sure it's nice and flush to the cake, taking off all that green. And then I can see a few gaps here, so I'll just go in and tidy those up again and just smooth those down onto the cake. And you can see when you don't mix the colouring perfectly into the buttercream, you get this really cool two-tone effect. Okay, so taking your offset spatula, you want to take it at an angle and brush it into the centre of the cake. Don't go any further than that centre. You're just going from the edge, brushing in and taking it off. I was taught, if you imagine, it's like an aeroplane coming into land and then taking off. It's very gentle. It comes down gently onto the runway, pushes that buttercream down, and then off it flies off again. And you just keep bringing it all into the centre of the cake. And that will give you a nice smooth top. Now just go around on my edge again with a spatula, and again you can do this with your bench scraper, it's not a problem. And just tidying up those edges. So I have a 1M Wilton style point tip, and I'm going to just fill up my piping bag and set this aside for when it comes to adding all the items that I have onto the cake. So I have some greaseproof paper here and some melted white chocolate. I've scrumpled up the greaseproof paper because I want to have this really cool effect. And what I'm doing here is making some chocolate sails for the cake. This isn't expensive chocolate. This is from Lidl. It's just a simple white chocolate, tastes delicious and works perfectly for this. So I'm just doing these into like a little fan shape, just using a teaspoon. You don't need any fancy equipment. And then I'm going to go in with Colour Mill Emerald Green. It's an oil-based colour, so it will add a really gorgeous colour to the chocolate and won't be diluted. The chocolate like absorbs these colours. They're fantastic. So I'm going to mix this into the leftover and do a really cool marble effect. Now you could leave it just like this. This looks super cool, but I'm going to kind of smush mine in a little bit more just because that's the kind of tone and colour that I'm going for. You want to make sure that you put the chocolate on here really thick. Don't do a thin layer. Make sure it's nice and thick because we're going to freeze these and then peel them off of the paper. And if they're really thin, they're not going to come off. They will crack. So you want a nice and thick amount of chocolate. And then I'm just pinching the bottom of this paper, crumpling it together and putting some tiny little pegs. And we'll pop these into the freezer. I need to kind of thicken these edges out a little bit more because I can see the paper through the chocolate, and I don't want that because I know that it runs a really high risk now of breaking when I try and take it off of the paper. So I go in with some double-sided tape on these cake boards and then just stick my chilled cake down onto the board like that. Remember, the cake is sitting on a cake card. And then I have this really cool chocolate drip, which I just buy them pre-made because you get this really gorgeous white colour, which is what I want. You microwave them for 30 seconds and then go in on a really cold cake and just start dripping that down. And you can see if I hold the bottle a little longer, I'll get a much longer drip. If I don't hold it too long and squeeze it too hard, then you get a shorter drip. So you can kind of play around with the length of the drip as well. So here, like I just squeeze it for a really long time, and then the more pressure, the longer the drip. And then you go, these are so cool. I love these ones. So I have some cookies, and I had this idea to also put like a white chocolate drip over the cookie. I thought it would add a really cool artsy effect and tie the whole cake together. Now, when you want to fill up a piping bag, the best thing to do is get a little cup, fold the piping bag halfway over, and then you can pop that into the jar or cup. Then you can take your frosting, ganache, filling, and just push this into the bottom of the bag, swiping it up against the side. And you can do this for all of your fillings, and even royal icing is the best way to fill up a piping bag and not have all the content falling out all over the place. So now I'm just taking the bag up, cutting off a nice big hole on the bottom, and then I can twist the top of the bag and start to push that ganache all the way down. And then you see how I'm holding the bag? I'm just put my thumb and I'm going to twist it round and round, and then that is how I'm going to hold my bag and push that ganache down into those macarons, releasing the pressure as I want to take it off. And you don't have to go to the edge because when you squeeze these macarons, the filling will push itself out to the edge. So these have been sitting in the freezer for about 10-20 minutes, and now I can gently peel these chocolate sails off of the greaseproof paper. And that's super cool. I'm really happy with how these have turned out. It's the first time I've done the marble effect on the chocolate, and I really like it. So I've just got some edible gold here mixed in with a little bit of alcohol, and I'm going to just flick this over my cake with a paintbrush, just spritzing it across to get a really cool pattern and effect on the side of my cake. Now, going back to that buttercream that I had, I'm going to do a nice little swirl with my star tip nozzle, and this is what we're going to use to hold all those sails and cookies and macarons onto the cake. I'll put some macarons next to the sails because the sail is so light it needs something to hold it up. And then placing my cookie on. The cookies are pretty large, and they're heavy as well, so we're going to need a lot of buttercream to keep those in place and some more macarons to kind of balance the weight in. I had to play around with this a little bit because I could see it was sliding and falling off. So just take your time and make extras of everything. So I will put some macarons on the side of that cookie, and I will put some at the back as well to just help hold that cookie up and in place. Adding a little bit more white drip to the other side of the cookie. I just broke this one in half just to give it a little bit more dimension and make the top more interesting rather than sticking two big massive round cookies on top. It's good to kind of play around with height when it comes to making these really cool overload drip cakes. And then after adding the last sail, I figured I should probably put the cake topper on, because once the topper's on, I can see where I want to position everything else. The macarons, I used Cake Cream by the Sugar Sisters. And then I've got this really beautiful shiny cake topper that I ordered on Etsy, which is my go-to for all my cake toppers. I break up some cookies and I add little bits of crumpled cookie as well onto the cake, and another macaron of course, and then figured it'd be super cool to just have some broken cookie around the edge of the cake, because the customer really insisted that their partner loves cookies, and that was kind of the theme of the cake, is to have some cookies on there and macarons. And then we're just adding buttercream to the back of those macarons as well and sticking those onto the side of the cake. And again, it just adds interest and dimension, so it's really good to kind of play around with the placement of the macarons. Adding a little bit more gold because this is a birthday cake and it's a celebration. But there you go. That is how I put together my green and gold and cream birthday cake. Thank you so much for watching, subscribe, and I can't wait to be back with more content for you guys.